we can see Air Force One approaching the airbase that you've been talking about here in Anchorage, coming in low, as I say, on a grey day here in Anchorage. But for President Trump, this is quite something. Air Force One coming in to land at this Air Force base, this American Air Force base. He has arrived first. President Putin, we are expecting soon afterwards. And the Russians say that Donald Trump will meet President Putin on the tarmac, and we'll see what happens. They may well say something. There'll certainly be pictures of them shaking hands, which is a significant moment, as you say, for an American president to essentially welcome back into the fold an indicted war criminal, a man who has been a pariah in many parts of the world, considered isolated in many parts of the world. So to that extent, this is, we see there the plane now on the tarmac. I say we see it, we can only just see it. But,
it's a misty
but it
day.
is there. It is there. And so to that extent, it's something of a risk for President Trump, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, Vladimir Putin's not been on US soil for almost a decade. The last time he was here was back in 2015. He met Barack Obama at the UN in New York, but that wasn't an invitation to him by Barack Obama. It was just by virtue of the fact that the UN is in New York that he was on US soil. Before that, it was back in 2007. So it has been a while. This is a huge moment for Putin. He's been brought back in, really, from the cold by Donald Trump and against the wishes of European leaders.
Yeah, let's bring in Catherine Belton of the Washington Post, an author of Putin's People. Catherine, thank you for being with us. And as we watch Air Force One land in Anchorage, are you surprised that Donald Trump has decided to do this?
Yes, really. I mean, it's an incredible U-turn. He went from nuclear posturing and moving nuclear submarines close to Russian territory, and also threatening, giving ultimatums, saying that he was very frustrated with Putin about how he kept having these nice conversations with Vladimir, and then he'd find out a few hours later from his wife Melania that in fact Putin had just bombed another maternity hospital in Ukraine. So it's an incredible flip, and it seems that it's one at least partly based on a misunderstanding, because just days before his ultimatum ran out, of course, he sent his special envoy Steve Witkoff to the Kremlin, and there Witkoff appears to have completely misunderstood what the Russians told him, because they said they were willing to halt the fighting in two key Ukrainian regions, in Kherson and Zaporizhia. And Witkoff apparently, according to European sources, walked out of there believing that Russia was ready to cede these territories to Ukraine. And all of a sudden you've got Trump saying we're going to do territorial swaps, we're going to give prime oceanfront property back to Ukraine, which is what those two regions represent. And then it turned out that was a complete misunderstanding, and Russia was only ready to stop the fighting, but it didn't want to move its soldiers back an inch. So it's really incredible that this is happening at all.
Catherine, I'm just reading here that a senior White House official has told our partners, NBC News, that President Trump will be joined by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff for today's initial meeting with President Putin and his advisors. And that kind of replaces, doesn't it, what was originally described as a one-on-one between President Trump and Putin. So it looks like, unlike what happened in Helsinki, there may not be this one-on-one meeting with just interpreters with them.
Yeah, well, if that happens, if that does happen, that it's a meeting and the assistants and the aides are also present, then that's hopefully good news because, of course, at that Helsinki summit, sort of Trump walked out after several hours of conversation with Putin, appearing completely deferential to him. He looked almost overwhelmed. I was told by one Russian analyst that she thought Trump looked unsure of himself, that he looked completely under Putin's influence. And, and during the joint press conference that they had then, it was famously so bad when Trump was saying he believed Putin over his own intelligence community's assessment that Russia interfered in the 2016 elections, that Fiona Hill, his own national security advisor on Russia, was saying later that she contemplated staging a seizure to halt the proceedings because everything was going so badly. So hopefully, if they've got sort of adults in the room like Marco Rubio, Putin won't be able to sort of bamboozle anyone with long, distorted histories about how Ukraine is apparently part of Russia's historical lands.
Yes. What do you make of this whole idea that coming from the Russians about 6 or 7 hours? And I mean, I'm not sure that President Trump will like that too much.
No, I don't think he really wants another history lecture from his friend Vladimir, however much they might say that they're good friends and respect each other. But I'm sure, but the flip side of that, as your correspondent pointed out, is that Putin is going to want to do everything he can to distract Trump as well, and not just have the talks about Ukraine, but make it about business deals, about the potential for economic cooperation and the sharing of hundreds of billions of dollars in resources in the Arctic. He's going to sort of lay it all out and quite thickly about how the US economy can supposedly benefit from cooperation with Russia. And he wants to do this over the heads of Ukraine and Europe because he thinks if he can strike an alliance with Trump, then the rest of Europe will have to crumble and fall in line too.
Yes, and just finally, Catherine, as we await Donald Trump at the top of the aircraft steps, I mean, this has been a rapidly organised summit, hasn't it? Most summits going, the great sort of US-Soviet summits since the Cold War, a lot of preparation goes into them. This is very different. I wonder, in a way, could this disadvantage President Putin?
Well, he's normally very, very well prepared. You've seen his sort of grasp and his mastery of detail. I don't think that will diminish, but I'm not sure the Russians have a really concrete plan, and they're not quite sure either about how Trump will react. They're a little bit worried too about his unpredictability. My colleague was in Moscow this week, and she was speaking to sources there, including one Kremlin insider who was basically saying that, no one really expected this summit to happen. So there's a huge flurry of activity now in the Kremlin with everyone preparing at the last minute. Whether that's true or not, we don't know. But Putin is certainly, but on the other hand, I think he thinks he has the upper hand because he thinks he's winning in Ukraine, and all he has to do is dangle some business deals and the prospect of economic cooperation and sort of great power discussions of nuclear security and so on, that he can distract Trump enough to allow him to continue to pursue his war in Ukraine. And he thinks he's got the upper hand. He thinks he's probably going to be able to convince Trump again that it's Europe and Ukraine who are the ones who are against any halt to the war. That's certainly his aim. I think one of the reasons this summit is happening is that the Russian elite actually got very concerned by Trump's kind of turn in mood in the last couple of weeks. weeks his frustration over Putin's continued bombardment of Ukraine and the lack of progress in any talks. So the onus is now really on Putin to try and convince Trump that it's not me, it's not my fault, it's Europe and Ukraine who are standing in the way of that, which of course is completely wrong, because Zelensky and Europe have always said we're ready at any moment for a ceasefire, but it has to be full and it has to be unconditional. Putin, of course, doesn't want that because he thinks he has the upper hand militarily. So he's just going to keep going for as long as he can. And in the meantime, he might try to distract Trump with talk of maybe a temporary limited ceasefire, maybe on energy infrastructure. He might say, we're ready to discuss that. He might say there could be a temporary ceasefire on airstrikes. We were told that the Kremlin was seriously discussing whether to hand Trump that kind of success. But the minute you have these type of temporary and limited ceasefires, then the Kremlin thinks, oh, well, we can blame Ukraine when it all breaks down, and we won't be the ones at fault, and then we can continue making our military progress. And hopefully Donald Trump will decide not to give any more weapons. And that's also the key thing they're trying to achieve.
Okay, Catherine, thank you very much for being with us, and we await the appearance of President Trump as Caroline Levitt, his spokesperson, confirms now that Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff, his friend who went to Moscow to well, in a way, I suppose, negotiate that this summit would happen. They will be with President Trump in the room with President Putin and his team. So it doesn't look as if the two men will be on their own with interpreters, as happened, some would say, not so well for Trump back in Helsinki in 2018. Martha, we await the appearance of Donald Trump. This is Joint Base Elmendorf, Richardson we're looking at, 64,000-acre site, and a reminder to Putin of the US military presence in Alaska and the Arctic.
Yeah, Air Force One touching down there just over 10 minutes ago now, so you imagine Donald Trump composing himself before walking down those stairs for that eagerly awaited handshake with Vladimir Putin. It's probably the most closely scrutinised relationship of any two individuals on the planet, isn't it? So, you know, everyone watching, waiting to see who will extend their hand first, if there'll be an exchange of pleasantries between the two leaders. But in keeping with the general confusion, the last-minute nature of this summit, we have this 11th hour update on the personnel who will be inside the room when Presidents Trump and Putin meet. We had expected it to be just a one-on-one meeting, as they had in Helsinki back in 2018, along with translators. Well, now we learn from Press Secretary Caroline Levitt that there will be two other men accompanying Donald Trump, his Secretary of State, his Foreign Secretary Marco Rubio, and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, who may be a less familiar name, but he's playing a huge role in this Trump administration. Steve Witkoff has a very limited level of experience when it comes to diplomatic negotiations. He is, in effect, an estate agent. You know, he's a real estate developer who became very close to Donald Trump decades ago. He is one of his closest friends, and I think the fact that he is playing such a key role in Donald Trump's administration, it indicates just how much Donald Trump values loyalty above anything else. You know, Steve Witkoff stood by him after January the 6th, when many of the people who were in his first administration abandoned him. They didn't want anything to do with him. He himself was something of a political pariah at that point. Witkoff stood by his side, and Donald Trump has rewarded him with this key role as peace envoy, you know.
Pretty much everywhere. I
mean,
not just Ukraine.
No, Israel, Gaza too. He's visited Moscow several times over the past 5 or 6 months. And, seasoned foreign policy experts worry that he may have been hoodwinked into agreeing to this meeting with Vladimir Putin under false pretenses. They worry that he doesn't have the political chops for this sort of occasion.
Yes, it's one of the reasons Donald Trump may not have emerged yet. It is drizzling here in Anchorage, and maybe he's waiting for that to stop. Very light drizzle falling here. Or he may just be waiting for President Putin to get here. The Russians did say Putin would be punctual.
Yeah. Trump actually arrived early, though, so that might be a reason for it as well. He was about 15 to 20 minutes ahead of schedule.
Yes. A trip across America to the largest state in America in terms of area.
Yeah, the least populated state. I think it's
the biggest in,
1.3 people per square mile here. So it is a wilderness. You're almost as likely to see a bear or a moose here in some places as you are to see another human being. But roughly halfway between Moscow and Washington, D.C. So geographically, I guess it makes sense, although, long journeys for both presidents, over 8 hours for Putin, and a similar length for Trump as well.
Yes, well, joining me now is the former Deputy Prime Minister and also Foreign Affairs Minister of Moldova, Nicu Popescu. Thank you for being with us, and forgive me if we break away if we see Donald Trump, but we'll just keep an eye on things. And at the very least, it looks as if Vladimir Putin is going to end up with a bigger foothold in Ukraine. I just wonder how worrying that is for you and your country.
Of course, for Moldova, Ukraine's security is fundamental to Moldova's future, Moldova's liberty and democracy. For now, I prefer not to anticipate too much how this might end in history. There have been many deals that looked like they were imbalanced. They looked like they were not very well prepared, and they were not final, but then they endured. The ceasefire between South Korea and North Korea is one such case where an imperfect and imbalanced deal that seemed like that at the time ensured peace for 70 years. So let's see. I prefer to see the details of the outcomes of today before analyzing rather than speculating. But for Moldova, Ukraine's capacity to defend itself, to be free, is fundamentally important. Yes,
but it does feel as if Donald Trump sees a land for peace deal, effectively annexation of some land, see a kind of deal like that as inevitable. I mean, you don't think it is inevitable?
A lot depends on the details of this. I think the fundamental thing is for Ukraine, for the government in Kiev, for the people in Ukraine that live on the territory controlled by the legitimate government of Kiev, is to stay and have the capacity to remain independent, resilient. And maybe with time we could move to a situation like East Germany and West Germany, which was resolved a few decades later. But I think besides the conversations about potential land swaps, the capacity of today's Ukraine run from Kiev to resist, to defend itself, to stay free for decades ahead is very, very important, and will also, of course, have an influence on the future. But again, the West Germany, East Germany model is not something that should be discarded. And that's why I think what matters is also to look at what happens on those territories that are run by the legitimate government of Kiev.
Yes, I'm just being told that Vladimir Putin's plane is just a minute or two away. But how concerned are the people in Moldova about the threat that Vladimir Putin's Russia could pose going forward?
It is very clear that Russia wants to recapture regional influence and do so with military means. We've seen the Russian aggression in Georgia in 2008, the Russian aggression against Ukraine in 2014 and 2022. So it's very clear Russia wants to regain as much of the former Soviet Union as possible. And it's doing so through hybrid means, through electoral interference, and that's something Russia does now in Moldova. And of course, this is happening besides the large-scale aggression against Ukraine. At the same time, in the last 3.5 years, we have seen Ukraine being able to resist, Ukraine being able to defend its territory, even if it's been losing somewhat some ground in the last year or so. We've seen Ukraine being strong enough to not to collapse, not to let Russia advance too fast. And this is where it's extremely important looking at the years and decades ahead for the United States, for the states of Europe to be able to continuously support Ukraine so that the Russian army is kept as far away as possible from the borders of NATO, the European Union, and Moldova.
Yeah, well, Niku, if there is some sort of land swap, as Donald Trump calls it, although the Ukrainians are slightly mystified by where the swap would be, but if there is a land deal, the crucial thing then becomes this whole issue of security guarantees for Ukraine. What do you think those security guarantees should be?
It's very clear that the main way to make sure that a new Russian aggression against Ukraine in a few years or in a few months or a decade down the road does not happen again is to have a Ukraine that is strong, that has the military means, the economic means to rebuild its army and to defend itself, and by doing so keep the Russian army as far away from other European countries as possible. So this is where I don't know exactly, of course, at this stage, no one knows what is the conversation, or very few people know what is the conversation about that Trump and Putin are going to have on who controls what. But another very, very important part of the equation is to make sure that the rest of Ukraine stays free, stays militarily strong and economically viable so that Russia doesn't try to re-attack again in a few years down the road and achieve those goals that it couldn't achieve after the large-scale invasion of 2022. So this is where basically my plea is to look very carefully at what happens, of course, to who controls what de facto. Of course, the de jure situation is something that matters a lot, but also to make sure that the Europeans and the Americans do not consider that this is the end of it. It's not peace, and the only way to make sure there's not another major war very soon down the road is to have a militarily strong Ukraine.
And on this issue of NATO, do we now rule out any possibility of Ukraine joining NATO?
Well, we've seen the current US administration being clearly very skeptical about it. So let's see how this conversation evolves. But my feeling is that it's very unlikely under the current administration for the American position to change on Ukraine's accession to NATO.
Yes.
What would happen in a few years or in a decade, it's hard to tell.
Yes, because that is one thing that would certainly infuriate Vladimir Putin.
Again, NATO offers legal guarantees, but besides that, there's other ways of keeping Europe and Ukraine peaceful in the next years, and that is having a Ukraine that is capable to defend itself, and having a European Union and a United States that continue military assistance to Ukraine, and that will remain a fundamental factor ensuring or limiting the risks of new war. So a militarily strong and economically viable Ukraine will be a fundamental factor for peace in the next years and decades in this part of the world.
Okay, Nicu Popescu, thank you very much for
Thank you.
being with us, and we are keeping an eye, as we have been doing for quite some time now, actually, on an open door and some steps from Air Force One, but it will be quite some moment that we are anticipating here. James Matthews is with the American delegation. And James, we were talking a little earlier about who was going to be with Trump. Would they meet? Putin and Trump meet on their own with only interpreters. We now have some clarity. We're told by the White House that Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff will be with Trump. Is it your understanding from them that there will not be this meeting of just the two in a room together?
Hi, Mark. Yeah, that's my understanding. That's the way it is shaping up, which will come as a comfort to those looking on from out with the United States and who don't trust Donald Trump in the company, one-on-one, tete-a-tete with Vladimir Putin. Critics of Trump, opponents, or seasoned observers who see him as a man whose weaknesses are multi-layered, particularly when it comes to flattery, to vanity, to an urgent need for stature and for legacy, and who think that in that setting, staring into the eyes of Vladimir Putin over the course of 7 hours, that Putin sees somebody who is pliable, who needs his friendship, who wants a reshaping of the world order, and Putin can do him a favour on that. And over the course of 7 hours, during which time Ukraine perhaps is marginalised, Vladimir Putin concentrates more on Trump, the success as he would portray it, Trump, the president who can enjoy more success by doing business with Russia, pursuing these options that will be up for discussion over the course of the day. Critics of Trump and observers think that that is the kind of setting and scenario in which Trump will fail and Ukraine will feel the consequences. So I think it's a comfort that there will be other people in the room. I think the Steve Witkoff thing is interesting, Mark, and Martha was talking about, this real estate property lawyer, big buddy of Donald Trump. I mean, he's a man who has a big job. He's the peace envoy, but he has the air for me of the work experience. Who one day you've sent for the lunch, he's done okay. Second day you've told him, right, go out and solve world peace now. I mean, he is a rookie when it comes to dealing with problems on that scale, whether it's Gaza or Moscow. And this business of the one-to-one meeting in Moscow a few weeks ago, it seemed to have triggered this. Witkoff and Putin, with Putin's translator, and Witkoff reportedly having come away with this deal, which actually looked okay and sounded like the Russians were prepared to cede territory. The Russians then having to correct it. It couldn't be more messy. So I can see why Witkoff might be in the room. And I can see Trump saying, OK, Vladimir, this guy says that you're going to give up X, Y, and Z. Are you telling me you got it wrong or did he get it wrong? Maybe that's a starting point for this meeting. But I think the more people in the room, having American interpreters in the room will be a comfort to many in the United States and certainly many in Ukraine and in the various European capitals.
Yeah, OK, James, I'm just keeping an eye out for President Putin's presidential jet and will continue to do so. Let's speak to Ivor Bennett, who's with the Russia delegation. And Ivor, we're talking about who's with Trump and the fact that it may lack some experience. Trump in this second term has gone for loyalty over experience. So what happens here will be quite interesting. Talk to us about the Russian delegation, because they really do look sort of battle-hardened, diplomatically speaking.
Yeah, that's right, Mark. I think the gulf in experience between the two delegations really couldn't be bigger. So Vladimir Putin is accompanied by his veteran foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, who's been in the job more than 20 years. He is a real diplomatic heavyweight, battle-hardened, as you say, and he's also got his foreign policy aide there, Yuri Ushakov, normally kind of operates behind the scenes, but he has come to the forefront with these negotiations with the US because, again, he has a whole wealth of experience. He was a former US ambassador. He was there between 1998 and 2012, I believe, a substantial period of time, certainly. And he's been Putin's foreign policy aide since then as well. So between them, they've got decades of experience, decades. And on the other side of the table, there are people who have been in the job only days. Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff. Witkoff, his background is in real estate rather than realpolitik. I mean, they are the golfing experience, as I say, really couldn't be bigger. It's men against boys in many ways. And I think the sense, certainly in Ukraine and Europe, is that the Trump administration, with figures like Steve Witkoff, simply don't understand what Putin's goals are in Ukraine. All this talk this week from Trump is about land swaps, territory, focusing very much on what's happening on the ground. But it's not just about territory for Vladimir Putin. It's also about the bigger picture, the geopolitical picture. He doesn't really overall want Ukraine to exist as a sovereign nation. He essentially wants to use it as a buffer zone against NATO. And the feeling in Ukraine is if Vladimir Putin is given any territory at all, he will be rewarded for his invasion of Ukraine, and he will just come back for more at some point in the future.
Yes, and I guess that the strategy of Putin and his delegation will be to either get a deal that's just too good to refuse, or to prolong things, delay things, and buy some time.
Yeah, that's right. And let's remember that Vladimir Putin is a master negotiator, a former KGB agent who's been doing this kind of thing for decades. So he will know exactly how he wants this to play out. And as we've seen during Trump's last presidency, he can call all the shots and pull the strings, but make Trump believe that he is the one in charge. And I think we'll get that here today. His long-term ultimate goal is to secure all of Russia's aims. He has shown no intention of backing down from his red lines or his maximalist demands. And I don't think he's going to start now. But his short-term goal is to take the pressure off Russia, the pressure that has been building from Donald Trump. So he'll have to give the appearance of making a concession. He knows Donald Trump cannot lose face here. He staked a lot on this summit, and he'll know that Trump will have something to show from this. He has to have something to show from this. So I think we'll get the promise of something that Trump can point to progress. Perhaps that'll be a loose promise of another meeting with Vladimir Zelensky, which Trump has talked up the prospect of. But if that's the case, I think there will be caveats. I think there will be strings attached. So it might actually be, although it might sound good, it might actually, in reality, prove unachievable, certainly in the short term. Or he will try and distract Donald Trump with other things and potential sweeteners. Putin has talked up the prospect of potentially discussing a new nuclear arms control treaty here at this summit. And if that's the case, that's exactly the kind of thing that Trump can point to say that, look, Russia does want peace in the broad sense, and Trump will take credit for that, but in reality, it just doesn't move the dial on Ukraine at all. There's quite
I should say, Ivor, sorry to interrupt you,
a plane overhead.
Yes, I was going to say, you're hearing it, we're seeing it, and we're told it is the Kremlin presidential jet, and President Putin will be on board that jet. I'm told that in the battle of the presidential jet, Putin's has a wider wingspan, but is slightly shorter, I think. That's that, and Putin has arrived, and Martha Kellner is with me here. And Martha, President Trump's still on Air Force One, and you are hearing that he's being greeted by the governor, Republican, I should say, governor of Alaska.
Yeah, Alaska, a red state, clearly. Donald Trump's landed about half an hour ago, just over half an hour ago, and he's been spending much of that time, I'm told, talking to the Alaska governor, as you say, Republican Mike Dunleavy, also the Alaska senators Lisa Murkowski and Dan Sullivan. I actually went to Governor Mike Dunleavy's office in Anchorage yesterday and was asking him about this meeting. He said he's expecting, hoping that there will be a peace deal at the end of today. I don't know, it feels quite ambitious to me that there will be a deal done by the end of the day. But I also asked him, about this suggestion that Putin is being rewarded here with this visit to a US military base, with this face-to-face meeting with the US president, being rewarded for his invasion of a sovereign nation. And he said to me, I don't think that he is. He said, I think this is an opportunity for the president to sit down face-to-face with him. He said that the president is going to ascertain really quickly in a face-to-face meeting whether Putin's serious or not for peace. And of course, Donald Trump has said this week that he believes that he will know whether Vladimir Putin is serious within a couple of minutes of being with him. Yeah. I presume he means a couple of minutes of being in that bilateral meeting with him rather than when they greet each other on the tarmac.
Yeah, and the choreography of this sort of aircraft diplomacy is extraordinary, isn't it? These huge jets rocking up in Alaska and outstep these presidents for this historic meeting, and those jets will await. Yeah. Well, if the Russians, if that's true, 6 or 7 hours, they'll have to wait some time, but it may not be that long. Donald Trump has said that he would know in 2 or 3 minutes whether Putin was serious about a deal. Whether that means Trump will walk out after 2 or 3 minutes if he's not serious about a deal, I don't think that is going to happen. But it'll be interesting to see how long it goes on. It'll be interesting to see who turns up for the news conference afterwards. Both of them, just President Trump, he's agreed to do one anyway. So all those will be signs of how well this extraordinary summit has gone.
The Kremlin and the White House will obviously have been in close contact ahead of this summit to choreograph this, whose plane is going to arrive first. Donald Trump always planned to wait on board Air Force One until Putin was on the ground. You'd expect Donald Trump to come down the stairs first and be waiting at the end of that red carpet for Vladimir Putin. We're also hearing, Mark, that after that initial meeting, which will involve President Trump, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, there is this expanded bilateral meeting, or rather a lunch that is planned. The same characters will be present for that, so Rubio and Witkoff, but also the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth, and Chief of Staff Susie Wiles will also join in that meeting. The fact that the Treasury Secretary and the Commerce Secretary will be there, perhaps an indication that Donald Trump is willing to broaden out this meeting beyond Ukraine to commercial interests. He is, after all, the man who, wrote The Art of the Deal. So it indicates that he will be willing to chat business should the talks about Ukraine go to plan. And certainly that's what Moscow are hoping for. They've got lots of business advisors in the delegation with Vladimir Putin as well.
Yes, I mean, Donald Trump is well aware that President Putin is quite keen to broaden this whole summit, not just Ukraine, but, as you say, talk of those other subjects. And James Matthews is with the Trump delegation. And James, presumably, Donald Trump would be quite willing to broaden it out into a much bigger summit in terms of the areas that they're going to talk about.
Yeah, I think he absolutely would, Mark. And bear in mind that there is a bigger picture here, as we have been discussing. Donald Trump, he likes the idea of geopolitical change that enhances the influence of himself and the United States. And Putin, he views as a partner in that exercise. So on the political front, there is a value in a relationship with Vladimir Putin. On the financial front, clearly, there is business to be done. And as we well know that Donald Trump is a transactional businessman at heart. I think therein lies potentially an advantage for Vladimir Putin. Mark, I think the more that he can broaden it out, the more or the smaller the Ukrainian problem appears to be. I can see a Putin strategy whereby, he talks big, he talks bigger picture, financial opportunity, political opportunity, marginalizing China perhaps. That will come up in the context of where these two take the politics of the world at large. I can see Putin, presenting that big picture in which Ukraine forms a very small part. I can see him likening it to, California, Gavin Newsom, governor of California. I can see Putin saying, look, we are big players on the world stage. We are the individuals who would shape the direction and define the world direction from here on in. People like, for you, Gavin Newsom, for me, Vladimir Zelensky, they're cameo players in all of this. A little local difficulty. If that's how Putin can define the Ukrainian issue over the course of 7 hours, during which much is to be discussed, I can see that playing with Donald Trump. He will take away from it much in terms of promise and perhaps a changed perspective on Ukraine. Putin trying essentially to dilute the Ukrainian issue in Putin's eyes. So we'll see where the strategy takes us. Right now, it's all about the picture, isn't it? The two presidential aircraft nose to nose. You mentioned that Putin has the wider wingspan. Size matters to Donald Trump, as we well know. That's why he wants Air Force One replaced by a Qatari jet. When the two meet, the plan is well choreographed. They will walk down the steps, meet at the end of that red carpet on the tarmac, and then be transported into a nearby building for talks. Ultimately, they will join us here in this Alaska Warrior Center. That's the event, the auditorium, the events auditorium. That's what it's called on this air base. But it will be a picture. Size matters to Donald Trump. He's 6'3". Vladimir Putin is 5'7". So that will give Donald Trump the photographic moment, I suppose. And we'll see what the interaction is. They haven't met since 2019. They had an extremely awkward meeting in Helsinki. You'll remember when Trump was embarrassed by his support for Vladimir Putin over his own intelligence officials who told him Vladimir Putin, Russia, had tried to interfere with the 2016 election in which you were elected. Trump stood on a stage in Helsinki and he backed Putin against his own intelligence community only later to turn that round. So, they have had their moments. They haven't gone particularly well necessarily for Donald Trump. He hopes to exploit this occasion over the coming hours, a 3-on-3 meeting, and thereafter there will be this breakout into the wider discussion over wider issues. But I think the concern, as we've been discussing, Mark, is generalities of a president who's come here and has been offering a running commentary since he left the White House this morning. He tweeted on Truth Social, or posted, "High stakes," 3 exclamation marks in capital letters. Thereafter, on board Air Force One, he spoke about the meeting ahead. Spoke about how Ukraine would not be allowed to join NATO, a key issue at the heart of all of this. Said he wanted to see a ceasefire, wouldn't be happy if he didn't see one, but didn't offer any consequences as he would see it of no ceasefire today. That's in contrast, that's a generality. And in Ukraine and in Europe, they would see it as a weakness, because in Ukraine and Europe, they've said no ceasefire today, then we will increase sanctions. That's what they want to hear from Donald Trump, and they have not going into this meeting. You know, from a president who has had much to say, riffing all the way here to Alaska, to the tarmac of this historic air base, and to this meeting imminent now with Vladimir Putin on the tarmac, up the red carpet, and into discussions.
Yes, James, thank you very much indeed. And as we can see, the scene is set for this meeting between Donald Trump, the handshake, and Vladimir Putin. His plane on the right-hand side, Air Force One on the left-hand side. 8:05 in the UK, 11:05 in the morning here in Anchorage, and there on the steps of the American aircraft you can see the words "Watch your step," and Donald Trump is going to have to do that in this meeting with Vladimir Putin. And many fear, many in Europe, certainly many in Ukraine, fear that he will fall into President Putin's trap, that President Putin will sell the idea of some sort of land deal to Donald Trump, knowing that it's a plan that President Zelensky could never accept, and then Donald Trump would then blame Zelensky for holding the whole thing up, because Donald Trump is keen to get a deal done pretty quickly. So it says watch your step. He'll have to do that, and it does seem though that Donald Trump Martha feels pretty upbeat, positive about things.
Yeah, he's spent a lot of time on the sort of 8-hour plane journey over talking to journalists. He spent 20 minutes answering questions. He was asked by a reporter whether he thought that today would be a breakthrough. He said, "I hope so." I think it's interesting the way his language about this meeting has changed over the past week. It was described earlier on in the week as a listening exercise, something that was just the first step, and that there would be other more important meetings that followed. Then we woke up today to a Truth Social post in bold capital letters that this was a high-stakes meeting, and now talk about potentially getting a deal over the line today. So
yeah, so there he is. The President of the United States of America emerges from Air Force One. Big moment for Trump. But this, of course, is a president who relishes big moments indeed. In many ways, his presidency is about creating big moments just like this. And I assume the plan is for him to get to the bottom of those steps and then go off to welcome President Putin to this Air Force base. And there is the picture. Two presidents about to, I won't say decide the future of Ukraine, but certainly talk about the future of Ukraine and have huge influence on what that future is for Ukraine. And although many in Ukraine will welcome the fact that this is happening, that things are moving perhaps towards a ceasefire, there will equally be many in Ukraine who are very worried about what is about to happen. So each of them walk down their respective red carpets and will soon be together. And for Vladimir Putin, he couldn't get here quickly enough, Martha. This is an opportunity for him. Donald Trump has given him that opportunity. He has been a pariah, certainly in the West, and Donald Trump has given him the opportunity to come here and take his place back at the top table of global diplomacy, and that, I guess, is already a victory for Putin, who is just walking behind that jet and is emerging now.
And a little clap from President Trump to announce the arrival of Vladimir Putin.
And there it is, all looked good-natured. They look pretty pleased to see each other. And that man on the left is out of the diplomatic deep freeze, certainly as far as the West is concerned. And it'll be interesting to see if they are going to speak beforehand. James Matthews is with the American delegation. James, tell us the plan. What is the plan? Are they going to speak before they get down to talks?
It would surprise me if they spoke publicly here, Mark. I'm in an event centre where there are two podiums set up with the tagline "Pursuing Peace" written behind. I think that's when we'll hear from both these individuals. I'm very happy President Trump clapping the arrival of Vladimir Putin, and big smiles. You know, this is the superpower moment, the smile and the shake of men who hold peace in their hands. A defining moment for both men.
So the assembled press there, shouting their questions. How can the US trust your word, was shouted at Putin. And if he did answer, I didn't see him answer. And so off they go to these talks, which the Russians have said could go on for 6 or 7 hours. And I would think that is something that the Americans are not prepared for.
Yeah, the White House indicated earlier this week that they expected the talks to last for 3 hours, and I think that's more of the time frame that Donald Trump would be expecting. You know, he does not want to be locked in a room with Vladimir Putin for 6 hours. We can actually hear just above where we are now fighter jets.
There we are, yes.
We can see in the distance.
Fly past. It's just roared over our head. A number of, there it is in the sky is a display of American military might right over Vladimir Putin's head.
Yeah, flying in diamond formation. They left from that joint base Elmendorf-Richardson, and not an unfamiliar sight in this part of Alaska. There's lots of air training exercises around here, but yeah, I'm sure there'll be a few demonstrations of American strength for Vladimir Putin today. Interestingly, on the flip side, I've been told that the Russian journalists who were flying over on the jet chartered by the Kremlin, they were eating chicken Kiev on their way over here, perhaps a dig to Ukraine there.
And the two presidents, extraordinary shot, actually, two presidents together. Off they go for the talks, and they were chatting. I mean, Donald Trump seemed to be doing most of the chatting in the back of that car, but off they go to do a lot more talking, and it really is quite some moment, isn't it? I mean, although the narrative is that Putin asked for the meeting, it was Trump who, and there's the handshake again, it was Trump who allowed it to happen, and allowed it to happen without seeking anything in return, certainly not a ceasefire.